Hey guys, this is my Chapter 2 Java video for the Barron's book. This chapter is called Classes and Objects, and it discusses objects and classes, encapsulation, references, keywords, methods, and the scope of variables. To start off, an object is something that is created to represent something that can be manipulated by different methods. It is defined by its parameters or is characterized by its state and behavior. A class is a blueprint for creating different objects, data types, and methods. When an object's data and methods are combined into one class, it is called encapsulation. In this code for the bank account class, there are instance variables, constructors, methods, and also accessors and mutators, which are two different types of methods. This is a simple code, but it is a good example to demonstrate classes and the methods inside of it. Now we're moving on to keywords, more specifically, the keywords public, private, and static. If the word public is used when declaring a class or method, it can be accessed by client programs, not just the class they're in. If the word private is used in a class, method, or instance variable declaration, client programs cannot access these declarations. These variables and methods can only be used within the class, unless an accessor or mutator method is used in other classes to get information. The keyword static is used for variables which share a value for all its instances in a class. A static variable is usually used to keep track of statistics for objects of the class, to accumulate a total, and to provide a new identity number for each object of the class. The word static indicates that a single value of the variable applies to the entire class. Next, we'll discuss methods. Methods are declared with the access specifier, return type, method name, then the parameter list. The curly braces are used directly following this, and the method is implemented there. There are a few types of methods. The first method is a constructor. A constructor creates an object of the class and always has to have the same name as the class. When declaring constructors, you must have a no-argument constructor, meaning that it is empty. Then you could create a constructor with an access specifier and the class name followed by parameters. To create an object from a constructor, you declare it with the class name, variable name equals new class name, and parameters. The result is an object variable that stores addresses of the information. Another method is an accessor method, which is used to get values about an object without altering the object. The mutator method is used to change the state of the object by modifying its instance variables. Static methods perform an operation for the entire class, unlike instance methods, which only operate on one object. The main method must be static. Overloaded methods are two or more methods in a class that have the same name but different parameters. When called, the compiler figures out which method is being used from the parameters that are given. The scope of the variable is the area that the variable can be accessed, whether it is a class or a method. Instance variables, static variables, and methods of a class are in the class's scope, and local variables are in the scope of a method. This is a keyword used to set the parameters in a method equal to instance variables of the class. Next, I'll go over different types of references. Numerical data types such as double, int, and boolean are primitive data types, while objects are reference data types. The difference between these types are how they're stored. Variables are like slots that are filled with information, while objects create a reference variable to store information. An object can also be created and left empty, or null. Method parameters are actually formal parameters in the method declaration. The actual parameters are in the object declaration. When running a method, parameters are passed by a value, but any changes that are made to the parameters will not affect the values of the arguments in the calling of the program. So once the method is exited, the memory slots for the parameters are erased. That's why, in the code below, the values of A and B remain the same, even after going through the method. Alright, so now that we went through the chapter 2 lesson, we could move on to the multiple choice questions for this chapter. So number 1 gives you a code segment with a class called time, and it asks which of the following is a false statement about the methods. So for this one, we could just go through the options. A says equals, less than, and toString are all accessor methods. So this is equals, less than, and toString. And since all of them say that they will return something, that is true because accessor methods return a value. So this one is a true statement. B says increment is a mutator method. So increment is right here, and it says that it advances time by 1 second. So it is a mutator method since it modifies a value. So this would be true. Time is the default constructor. This is time, and it looks like the default constructor because it's a no argument constructor, so that would be true. The time class has 3 constructors. So there's 1, which is the no argument constructor, and then there's 2. And there are no other methods that has the same name as the class, so there would only be 2 constructors, making D the right answer. But let's just go to E to make sure. There are no static methods in this class, and there aren't any static methods in the class. So the correct answer would be D. So for number 2, they ask for the correct implementation code for the constructor with parameters. The constructor with parameters is public time. So what you would want to do for this one is set each of these parameter variables equal to the instance variables from the class. And the only option that does this is B. Number 3 asks you to fill in a method that will display the time from hours, minutes, seconds. So they give you 3 segments, so we could go through each of them. The first segment creates an object, t, and then it tries to print out the object, but you're not able to print out objects that way, so this wouldn't be a correct replacement. So number 2 uses an object to access the hours, minutes, and seconds, but hours, minutes, and seconds were declared as private in the code segment from before, so that wouldn't work. And code segment 3 goes to the toString method, and that would end up correctly printing in the way that they want. So 3 would be the only one that works, so C would be the right answer. Number 4 is asking which statement about parameters is false. So A says the scope of parameters is the method in which they are defined. This is a true statement, so that wouldn't be the answer. B says static methods have no implicit parameter this, and that's true because you need to declare this. C says 2 overloaded methods in the same class must have parameters with different names, and that's false because parameters don't have to be different variable names, they just have to be declared as different types. So C is probably the answer, but we can go through the rest of the answers. D says all parameters in Java are passed by a value, and this is true, all references are passed by a value. 2 different constructors in a given class can have the same number of parameters, and this is true, they can have the same number of parameters as long as they have different types. So the answer would be C. So the next few questions refer to this code, and the code is, the class is named date, and it has integers day, month, and year. It has an empty constructor, then one with 3 variables as parameters, and some methods that return each private variable. So for number 5, they ask which of the following correctly constructs a date object in a client class. The way to create an object is to write the class name and then name the variable, so I'll just put v, equals new, and then the class name again, which is also the constructor name, so you could write it either way, and then the parameters. So for this one, you would write date, and they use D, so I'll use D, equals new date, and then it should be month, day, year. The only one that correctly does this is B. Okay, number 6 asks for which code segment will cause an error message. So we could go through each of the segments. So 1 declares the object correctly, then it creates another object and sets it equal to the first one. So that should be good. There doesn't seem to be an error there. The second one creates a null object and then sets another object equal to this object. So that would be good as well. And then number 3 creates a null object, but it calls a method for a null object, and that would cause a null pointer exception, which is an error. So the correct answer would be C. For number 7, they have a client program which creates date as an object, and it's asking for which of the following code segments will cause an error. So for A, it's able to call a toString method from the code, so that would work. B, it could call the date method from the code, which is what it's doing, so that wouldn't cause an error message either. For C, they just set an object equal to another object that they declared, so that would also be good. For D, they create a new object, which wouldn't cause any error with that. And for E, the declaration that they provided accesses a private instance variable, so that would cause an error, meaning that E would be the correct answer. For number 8, they want you to write it as month, day, year. So for the first code segment, the write method is in the date class, so it's able to access the private variables from the class. So writing the variable names in the system out print line would be alright. So 1 would work. For the second one, the month, day, and year methods all return their respective values, so it would also correctly print. And number 3, this accesses the toString method, which prints out the date in the correct format. So 3 would also work, and that means that all of them would work, so E would be the answer. Number 9 is asking you to continue filling out a method that would get your birth date. So they give you 3 segments, so we could go through each of them. So 1 asks you to enter the month, day, then year. Then it sets each variable equal to itself using the I0 readInt method, and then it creates an object with the variables. So this one seems good. There would not be an error for this one. For the second one, they use the I0 readInt method, which would get information from the accessor methods, the getter methods, and that may not read the new values, so this would cause an error. And the third one tries to access private instance variables, which would cause an error. So the only one that would work is A. In number 10, they declare a new object, D1, and they ask to create another object, D2, that's an exact copy that object D1 refers to. They're asking which of the following code segments will not do this correctly. So for the first one, it creates an object referencing D1, and this means that it's not a new object. D2 just refers to D1, which would cause an error. So number 1 wouldn't be right, but they're asking for which one will not do this correctly. Number 2 says that you can create a new object D2 with the value month, day, and year. And since they're previously defined integer variables, the value would be the same. So this would not cause an error. And the third one creates a new object using values from the first object, which would also be good, causing no error. So the only one that causes an error is A.